Hey, what up, guys? So, Sergey Kovalev beat Eleider Álvarez in their rematch yesterday, or actually, today. It was this morning. In fact, if I look or sound a little tired, it's because I am. That main event didn't get done, with the post-fight interviews and everything didn't get done until after like 2 a.m. here on the East Coast. And then I had to, I was checking my Twitter and everything else. So I didn't get to bed till 3 a.m. All right, so give me a break. Anyway, Sergey Kovalev wins the rematch, completely outboxes Eleider Álvarez, and really nullified what Álvarez wanted to do, who really was looking for one big punch, and kind of drank the Kool-Aid like myself and a lot of us did, thinking that Kovalev was in a position where he was just going to fold with the big right hand once that started landing in the middle rounds. Kovalev took those big punches. The same punches that dropped him in the first fight, he ate them in this fight. He took them and didn't just take them, he responded. And he'd often eat a big shot and come back with a big combination of his own. Didn't punch hard in the fight, but as Andre Ward, who did a great job commentating last night for the main event, Kovalev and Álvarez, as he mentioned during that broadcast, Kovalev's heavy-handed. He doesn't need to wind up and really put everything into every punch. He's a heavy-handed guy. All he needs to do is shoot really quickly and really straight. If he does that in a counter-punching type of role, that's enough for him to keep a guy off. It's not going to knock a guy out, but it's going to keep him honest, keep him off. And that's what he did. And that's what heavy-handed fighters, that's all they really need to do. So real quick about Andre Ward, who, look, you guys know, if you follow me, and if you have followed me for a few years now, you know that I've been critical of Ward. So much so that he blocked me on social media at one point. Although I wasn't particularly a fan of his fighting style and some of the ways he conducted business and everything outside the ring. I give credit where it's due. And obviously, Andre Ward is a first ballot Hall of Famer. I mean, the first year of eligibility, he's getting that check mark, right? But awkward situation for him last night. The ESPN broadcast, Ward was up at the desk with Max Kellerman and some guy I've never heard of, which is where they usually have him during fights. And they go to him in between fights, before fights, just to analyze things. Sometimes they'll have a fighter up there, they'll interview him, yada, yada, yada. Well, during the main event, they brought him down ringside to be part of the actual blow-by-blow team, along with Tim Bradley, Joe Tessitore, Mark Kriegel. And I thought that had to be somewhat of an awkward situation for him. ESPN made it a point to mention multiple times that in the lead up to this fight, Andre Ward, the commentary crew will very, very often go into the fighter dressing rooms and just talk to everybody, get some what I call B-roll information, right? Just some background stuff that they might use during the broadcast. There's often, a fighter meeting and everything. That's official stuff. But actually, the day of the fight, a lot of times commentary crew will go into the dressing room, talk to the fighters. Sergey Kovalev's team did not want Andre Ward in their dressing room. They didn't want him there. They didn't want to see him. And ESPN tried to mention that a few times to kind of get Andre Ward talking some trash. To his credit, he said, look, if the situation were reversed, I'd do the same thing. Just mentally, you don't want to see the guy that gave you your first L and everything else, right? So besides that, you could see that the ESPN crew was trying to bait Ward into talking some trash. Max Kellerman got him to do it a little bit up at the desk earlier, but during the main event, in this awkward kind of situation where other less professional commentators probably would have folded themselves and started talking some trash and interjected some personal biases and opinions in there. And Andre Ward's not a fan of Sergey Kovalev as a person, but I thought Ward did an outstanding job. He was honestly the best member of that blow-by-blow crew. I thought Tim Bradley did a good job as well, and he predicted Kovalev to win. A lot of people thought he was crazy, including myself, and now he looks like a genius. He called it. But I thought Ward did a great job and deserves credit for that, because that couldn't have been easy for him, and he could have went down a different path during that broadcast. So good for Andre Ward, man. Okay, to the actual fight. Stephen Breadman Edwards. Great trainer, even greater boxing mind. If you guys are not following him on Twitter, you should be. If you're a boxing diehard, you should follow Stephen Breadman Edwards. Before this fight, he tweeted, and I'm paraphrasing, okay? But you guys can go and find the tweet. he talked about the fact that very, very often in boxing, when a bully fighter, a fighter seen as a bully, and I hate that term to describe a boxer, I'm going to use the term intimidator, okay? When an intimidator loses that aura of invincibility, almost never can they come back from that and have a second life, if you will, to their career. He mentioned exceptions to the rule, like Ben, Duran, Foreman, right? But then after that, the list gets very thin. And that's exactly what Stephen Breadman Edwards said in his tweet. And he said, if Kovalev can win tonight, that punches his ticket into the Hall of Fame, because that puts him in very rare company on top of all his other accomplishments already. And lo and behold, that's exactly what Kovalev does. He turns back the clock, completely outboxes Alvarez, clearly wins the fight, basically shuts him out. It'd be hard to give Alvarez more than a round or two, and I'll talk more about that in a second, because some of the media scoring was atrocious. And that is a freaking problem in this business right now, particularly in the American boxing media. But I thought Breadman, his tweet was prophetic, and it was absolutely on point. And I agree with him that with this performance from Kovalev, it's not just who you beat, it's how you beat them. And a lot of times it's when you beat them, where you beat them, where you were at in your career, in your life. For Kovalev, who just started working with trainer Buddy McGirt, who did an outstanding job. Actually, finally somebody got through to Kovalev. Kovalev's worked with 1 billion trainers in the last few years. Continues to do things his own way. Doesn't listen. And it destroyed his career. It really, really did. The losses to Ward, look, the first loss to Andre Ward, most people, most observers feel that Kovalev won that fight. There are people out there, obviously, that feel Ward won. But about 3/4 of media, fans, pundits, analysts, whatever, feel Kovalev won that fight, whatever. The second fight, obviously, some controversy with some of the low blows and stuff, but Ward won that fight, okay? And then after that, the wheels really fell off with the Alvarez fight, where Kovalev simply gassed. He looked amazing the first 3-4 rounds and then was out. And it made him appear to be two things. One, it made him appear to just be mentally and emotionally checked out after that first Andre Ward loss, where he and many, many people feel that he was really screwed over by the politics of the system. And the little guy, the disenfranchised guy, in that case, that was Kovalev, got screwed over by the politics for the benefit of the privileged guy. In that case, that was Ward, the A side, you know, the American guy, blah, blah, blah. That's a dead horse that's been beaten way too much, so I won't delve into that. But after that, it seemed like Kovalev was just mentally and emotionally checked out. But second, a lot of people felt that Kovalev at that point showed that he couldn't handle any resistance, any adversity, that he was quite, for lack of a better word, a pussy. And if you didn't like Kovalev personally, a lot of people out there don't, for different reasons, they piled onto that narrative. This dude's a bully, and look, the bully is acting like a pussy. He finally gets hit in the chin and he can't take it. He takes a hard body shot. Maybe it's borderline. What a pussy. He folds over. He ain't no bully. He's just a pussy, right? So those two narratives are being spun a lot. And he knows it, okay? He knows that. And they know which members of the media are pushing this stuff and why those guys have certain agendas against him and who pays their check. So to take all of that, plus the legal trouble he has going on outside the ring with he's being accused of physical assault. He was arrested for it. There's an $8 million lawsuit, court dates pending. Okay, there's just chaos all around this guy. Taking all of that and coming back and beating a guy who didn't just beat you, but stopped you. Guys, how many times in boxing history, at the highest level, I'm not talking mid-range level, B level, I'm talking at the A level, top 10 fighters in their division, how many times has this happened? Where a fighter who gets brutally stopped, fighter B gets brutally stopped by fighter A, rematch, fighter B dominates fighter A and wins. How many cases can you name where that's happened? That's why, again, I go back to Stephen Edwards' tweet and why it was so great and why I agree with him. I pretty much agree with everything Breadman says. Again, one of the best boxing minds out there. I don't know how and why one of the networks hasn't picked him up as a part of the commentary crew. DAZN could really use him. ESPN certainly could as well. So anyway, that's why this accomplishment is so big for Sergey Kovalev, and why I, again, beat a dead horse here. I feel he punched his ticket into the Hall of Fame. Look, he's had the title now 3 times, 3-time world titleist, right? Beat legit guys to win his title the first go around, and then unified titles and became the actual, legitimate, recognized light heavyweight champion of the world. Yes, he never got that title, that WBC title Adonis Stevenson held. That's because Adonis Stevenson shamelessly ducked Sergey Kovalev the same way he shamelessly ducked Eleider Álvarez for years, and the BC allowed him to do it. So I'm not even recognizing Stevenson. Kovalev was the man in the division. Then the Andre Ward thing happened, right? Those 2 fights. Ward becomes the champion, then he retires. The division's blown up. There's titles all over the place. Kovalev grabs one of them. You look at who he fought and beat to grab that title the second go around, paper thin, right? So I don't really recognize that title right there. But coming back and beating Eleider Álvarez, who is still, after this loss, his first professional loss, a top 5 light heavyweight. He really, really is. For Kovalev to win in the fashion he did, it wasn't a fluke. It wasn't some lucky punch. He didn't eke out a close fight, regardless of what some people in the media say. He dominated and nearly shut out Álvarez at this point. That's a legit title he has right now. He has a strong claim to a piece of the light heavyweight championship right now. So that's a big, big accomplishment. And what does that mean for the division? More about that in a second. I just real quick wanted to touch on some of the press row scoring. So it's no surprise that Sergey Kovalev is a divisive, well, polarizing figure. Okay, I'll say polarizing figure in the sport of boxing. Not unlike other guys, plenty of other guys. Adrian Broner, for example, is one of those guys who's just very polarizing, turns a lot of people off. The Charlos, Jermell Charlo, Jamal Charlo, they turn a lot of people off. I mean, there's guys in the sport, varying degrees of it, of course, but there are some guys who are just polarizing figures. And Sergey Kovalev is certainly one of them. I don't know if he's the most polarizing, but if there's a Mount Rushmore of most polarizing fighters in the sport right now, he's on it, okay? So that's no surprise right there. There are a lot of people that just don't like the dude personally for a multitude of reasons. Some of it's justifiable. Some of it, Sergey, has just stepped into some shit. But some of it comes from a place of political bias, if not outright prejudice that some people have. And look, there's a lot of anti-Russian sentiment in this country right now, a lot of anti-Russian hysteria and everything else. So maybe that plays a role in it. I've seen some of that personally covering some of his fights live from particular entities in the media who scored this fight ridiculously badly last night. If you are a member of the media, and let me be clear about who I'm talking about, okay? I'm not talking about guys who just get credentialed to fights. It's not hard to get credentialed to a fight anymore, particularly a fight card in Frisco, Texas. That's not necessarily a hotbed of boxing or a big market, right? It's part of Dallas is a big sports market, but you guys hear what I'm saying, okay? It's not LA, it's not Vegas, it's not even New York. It is Frisco, Texas. So there are a lot of people that can get credentialed to fights. And look, I started that way myself, just being one of those junior guys that gets in there and tries to work your way up. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about people that are paid money to contribute to, whether it's magazines, print media, newspapers, even if it's online media sources. If you are paid regularly for your contributions, for your work, I'm not talking about $20 or, a few cents per click. I'm talking about you turn in an article to an editor, you get a check for that. You get paid for that, okay? If you are a paid media member and you had that fight scored, there were several guys last night I saw on Twitter that had that fight scored, I think a 1-point fight going into the 12th round. That's a problem. Either you are letting your political leanings and maybe ethnic, nationalistic biases and prejudices play such a role emotionally in you that it's affecting your scoring, or you just don't know what the hell you're watching. And if you're being paid to do this, Boxing, more than many other sports, the fans, the diehard fans, are extremely knowledgeable, and they will check your ass when you get something wrong. Anytime I screwed up my Charlo brothers in an episode of my podcast recently. I had several tweets reminding me of it, several comments on YouTube reminding me of it right away. It's not that I don't know which Charlo's which. It's that in the moment, during my podcast, I switched the names. I screwed up my Charlos. And boy, did I get slammed on for that, right? Boxing fans, the diehard fans, are extremely knowledgeable. And there are certain members of the media who are corporate guys, went to school, got journalist degrees, started out doing sports journalism, and somehow, some way, through a connection, got their job in boxing. It's not necessarily because they were boxing people who worked their way up through the sport of boxing, which is how I've kind of made my niche in the boxing media, and a lot of guys like me have. No, it's corporate, executive, knowing, Ivy League type dudes, or not even Ivy League, just, college educated guys who get in that way. And you can tell they don't really know what they're talking about, right? So it's one of two things. And it's bad enough that we have professional judges getting paid, that routinely we see poor scores. And look, 2 of the judges gave Álvarez 4 rounds last night. That's too many. One judge had a 120, 108. That was the best score last night. I gave Álvarez a round. I had it 119, 109. But it's bad enough we have professional judges who get paid, who routinely turn in shit scorecards. Fans rely on the media to set those things straight. There's so much fuckery in boxing with all the sanctioning organizations and all these different platforms. How do you make sense of all this stuff? You guys turn to guys like me to make sense of it all for you, right? So I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I don't have my preferences for certain fighting styles, and there are some favorites I have in the sport to watch, and there are some personalities I like better than others, and certain guys that rub me the wrong way that I don't really like, but I don't ever let that shit affect the way I score a fight. Real quick, just some punch numbers, and I know punch numbers, not the end-all be-all of scoring a fight, but they do provide an indication of the action that took place, particularly in a fight like last night, okay? Real quick, guys, Sergey Kovalev threw more punches than Eleider Álvarez in all 12 of the 12 rounds of the fight. In several rounds, he more than doubled, in fact, in more than half of the rounds, he more than doubled the output, the punches thrown, than Álvarez. Some of them, he tripled the output. In the 7th round, he threw 105 punches. The first fight, he was stopped in the 7th round. You think he was trying to make a point in the 7th round last night or this morning? He threw 105 punches. It's not just activity, though. He outlanded Álvarez in 11 rounds. In 5 rounds, he landed more than double the amount of punches of Álvarez. In 1 round, he threw landed more than triple. He landed 213 total punches out of 816 thrown. Álvarez landed 111 of 369 thrown. So just looking at activity, okay, it is very, very clear that Kovalev outworked Álvarez. I just gave you the stats. He outworked him in all 12 rounds. He outlanded him in 11 rounds. Doubled and tripled the work in some cases, right? So it's not that hard of a fight to score unless you're coming in with some sort of bias or anger pointed at Kovalev. Very, very easy fight to score. And I was surprised and quite frankly disappointed by some of the media scores I saw last night. But sadly, it's becoming a growing problem in the sport. So I'll leave it at that for now. I'll talk about this whole fight card in detail when I do the Neutral Corner tomorrow, guys. So if there's anything you want me to hit on specifically, comment below and let me know. But a lot of people are asking right now, well, before I get to what's next for Kovalev, let me just say this. A lot's been made of Álvarez not throwing a lot of punches and everything, just his activity being low. And a lot of people are saying that he simply just had a shit game plan or an off night, or maybe that's part of it. But I don't think Sergey Kovalev's getting enough credit. He was working so much, it caused Álvarez to cover up. And when you got a guy tapping you, even if he's not hurting you, if you're getting shots that you got to block, you can't necessarily get off. One thing Kovalev did a good job in is getting in, boom, 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 getting out. He gave very good angles. He didn't back straight up. He was on the side. He leaned back a lot. And I think that troubled Álvarez. And he looked frustrated early on. He looked increasingly confused later in the fight and didn't really have many answers in the post-fight presser. He gave Kovalev full credit. So Álvarez deserves credit for being humble in his first loss. He made no excuses. But I don't think a lot of you guys are focusing too much on what Álvarez didn't do and not really focusing on why. Kovalev essentially neutralized what Álvarez wanted to do. And he was looking for one big shot, and Sergey saw it coming. And Buddy McGirt deserves tremendous credit for what he's done with Kovalev. He's an early front runner for Trainer of the Year because he got Sergey, again, finally somebody got through to him to back off, stay on the outside, mid-range. When you get in close, cover up, hold if you have to. Don't let this guy tee off on your body too much. You go downstairs early and often, and Sergey did do that. He looped a nice right hand around, just kind of slapped Álvarez in the body, and then slapped him behind the ear up here because Álvarez had his earmuffs on. But because Sergey just kept it neutral, he just kind of kept everything in neutral. He kept the speed. He was driving the speed limit, if you will. He never sped. He stayed driving the speed limit. So if you stay driving the speed limit, or maybe you go 5 miles per hour over, you can drive right by a cop. You ain't getting a ticket. But if you punch it and you're doing 20 over, especially if it's in a school zone, you're not only getting a ticket, you might be getting arrested. And that was a mistake Sergey made so many times before because he had that intimidator mentality. Buddy McGirt got him to pull back and just do some old school boxing. And Sergey was able to do that. That's how he won that damn fight. And that's why Álvarez only threw 369 punches. It's not because Álvarez went in there wanting to lose. Sergey took that fight from him with a superior game plan and quite frankly, just being a better boxer, being a better athlete, being a better boxer. Kovalev's boxing skills are still severely underrated. And Andre Ward, again, to his credit, made that point several times last night. I thought he did an outstanding job in that broadcast and deserves credit. Okay, what's next for Kovalev? Well, right now, as I mentioned before, Ward was the guy. When he retired, everything blew up. Well, now you got Dmitry Bivol, right? You've got Alexander Gvozdyk. You've got Marcus Brown, who Gvozdyk has to fight, but he has a voluntary defense coming up, I think, next month. And then he will fight Marcus Brown later in the year. So those two guys are tied up. And then, who am I forgetting here? Artur Beterbiev. So we look at the network landscape. The odd man out is Dmitry Bivol. He just signed with DAZN. So he's kind of out right now. I think his next couple fights are, he's doing a cross-promotional thing with Matchroom. He's going to be, possibly they're lining him up for a future date with Callum Smith, which I think would be really, really cool. Especially over in the UK, that'd be a lot of fun. But he's kind of the odd man out right now. And it sucks because I interviewed Dmitry Bivol for Ring Magazine, a piece I did in Ring Magazine late last year in the fall. And he told me straight up several times, he's always wanted to fight Sergey Kovalev. He was older he's older than Bivol. And in the amateurs as a kid, Bivol would kind of look up to Sergey. And it was just a guy he always kept his eye on. And he really wanted to fight him. But I think him and his team, you know, they went that other direction, and now he's not going to get that Sergey Kovalev fight. But Gvozdyk and Beterbiev, ESPN guys. So last night, you know, Main Events represents Kovalev, but that was a cross-promotional thing with Top Rank, who has the deal with ESPN. So Kovalev can work with Top Rank again, do a cross-promotional thing. There's no reason we can't eventually see a unification fight between Kovalev and Gvozdyk, should he beat Marcus Brown. And that Marcus Brown fight is going to be a very tough matchup. Marcus Brown, big, tall, long guy, uses his height well, physical fighter, knows when to hold. I think it's going to be a tough fight. I still favor the nail, but that's going to be a tough fight for him. Might be the toughest fight of his career thus far. Much tougher than the Adonis Stevenson fight. So, yeah, eventually, maybe early next year, unification with Gvozdyk. But in the meantime, man, what's up with Artur Beterbiev? Russian fighter, has a title, based out of Canada. Sergey has traveled up to Canada before. He's fought there several times. That's a doable fight, man. Maybe toward the end of this year, maybe we could see something like that. Also, don't forget, Top Rank, ESPN, they represent one Gilberto Zurdo Ramirez, who is busting at the seams at 168. As mentioned, he wants to move to 175. At some point, who wouldn't love to see a fight between Zurdo and Crusher? Just style-wise. There's going to be 2,000 punches arguably thrown in that fight if it goes all 12. That would be fun as hell. I'd love to see it. So a lot of options right now, but it's very, very clear that the light heavyweight division, that landscape, is kind of being run by Top Rank and ESPN. That's where the majority of the big fights are going to be over the next couple of years. In this divided political landscape of all these different networks, right, all these different platforms, it's good that we have one division that's kind of encapsulated mostly by one platform, one network. So I think that there are good fights that can be made. All the fights I just mentioned, guys, I think they're doable. Are they going to happen right away? No. I think Sergey's going to get a soft touch next, which honestly he deserves. You look at the guy's schedule the last few years. Andre Ward twice. Eleider Álvarez, one of the most avoided and ducked fighters in the division in recent years, twice. That's a pretty damn strong schedule. And then let's be honest, he's got court dates and all that shit to take care of. And if he's found guilty, if there's evidence that this thing really happened and he really did abuse this woman, his career is going to blow up again. So we don't know what's going to happen with all that stuff. But there are good fights on the horizon. How he will do in all those fights, we'll talk about that if and when they happen, okay? But anyway, just wanted to rant about this real quick. Some good, some bad, some ugly last night. Fight card way too late. And going from ESPN Plus to ESPN back to ESPN Plus, that's insane. That's hard, you know. Talk about making shit difficult for diehard boxing fans. And not just that, but for media guys. We're not all going to fly to Frisco, Texas to cover this fight. So if I'm at home watching, tweeting, gathering notes for my podcast Monday and everything else, and I got to go back and forth and all this, and it's a pain in the ass for me, and I'm getting paid for this shit, a fan watching at home, imagine what it's like for them. You know what I'm saying? Top Rank's got to do better with this shit. That card was all over the place, and I love that it was a stacked card. There was a lot of big names on it, some up and coming guys, some top level guys. Find a way to make this shit start earlier. Put the whole damn undercard on ESPN Plus. Go over to ESPN for the co-main and the main event. Figure out how to schedule that shit. Even if the people in Frisco, Texas have to go to the fight a little bit early, they won't mind because they can go to the bar and have fun after the fight. That's what people in LA do. That's what people in Vegas do because those fight cards start early out there. Top Rank, got to figure this shit out, baby. Got to figure this shit out. For me to still be tweeting past 2 a.m., okay, not cool. Not cool. All right, I'll stop complaining about that shit. Great night at the fights, though, man. And again, I'll talk about it more in detail on TNC this week. All right, guys, let me know what you think. Give me some questions below. Follow MOB, all right? Follow everywhere that podcasts are distributed. Search for this, find it, follow it, all right? I'll see you at the fights.